I had never learned to say no, not to the cook who needed extra hands during the morning rush, not to Wren who borrowed my last copper coin and never returned it, not to Hollis who asked me to cover the late shift 3 nights running, and certainly not when Madame Voss appeared in the doorway of the servants' hall, her face thunderous, demanding anyone deliver refreshments to the visiting king immediately. Every head in the room turned toward me. Of course they did. I stood without thinking. The movement was automatic like breathing, because saying no required disappointing people, and disappointing people felt like dying. That summer evening, the palace kitchens hummed with stolen joy. Above us in the great hall, dignitaries negotiated peace between kingdoms. Down here, we celebrated with wine we had no business drinking. The bottles had appeared mysteriously passed hand to hand until they reached the long wooden table where I sat wedged between my 2 closest friends. The wine was exceptional. I knew this because Wren kept saying so. When's the next time we'll taste something this fine? She draped an arm around my shoulders, her words soft at the edges. Come on, Brynn. Just one more glass. I looked at the wine, looked at Wren's hopeful face, felt that familiar tug, that desperate need to make someone happy. I drank. The 5th glass went down easier than the first. Everything felt warm and loose and perfect. Hollis was laughing so hard she'd slid halfway off her stool. Someone was singing. The stone walls held the heat of the day, but down here in the coolness of the underground kitchens, the air felt like permission. To Princess Isolde, someone called out, raising a cup. Poor thing marrying that terrifying bastard for the good of the kingdom. The visiting king, Wren stage whispered to me. King Caspian of Stormhaven. Nobody's seen him yet, but the rumors are dreadful. They say he killed a man for looking at him wrong, Hollis added, her eyes wide. Perhaps the princess loves him. I offered because I believed in hoping for the best. I always had, even when hope made me a fool. The kitchen erupted in laughter. I laughed too, though I couldn't remember what was funny. The door banged open. Madame Voss stood there and the laughter died. Our head housekeeper had a face that suggested she'd been containing fury for the past hour and had finally run out of container. A visiting lord, she said, each word clipped and precise. Requested refreshments brought to his chambers an hour ago. No one went. Guilty silence bloomed around me. There will be consequences if someone does not bring them immediately. I felt every head swivel toward me like compass needles finding north, because of course they did. Helpful, dependable Brynn who never said no. Brynn who would fix this. Brynn who always fixed everything. I stood. The floor tilted slightly, but I compensated. West wing, Madame Voss said. 3rd door on the left. Do not make this worse. I nodded. I meant to say something reassuring, but the words tangled on my tongue, so I just picked up the tray and went. Behind me, Wren called out, If the Lord's angry, just be yourself. You're adorable. He'll calm right down. Tell him you love him, another voice shouted, dissolving into giggles. I dare you, Wren said. I dare you to tell the First Lord you see that you love him. Brynn would never, someone else said. She doesn't know how to be daring. I stood in the doorway, tray in hand, and felt something shift inside my chest. When was the last time I'd done something unexpected? When was the last time anyone had thought of me as anything other than boring, reliable Brynn, who always said yes, Brynn, who cleaned up everyone else's messes? Brynn who never caused any trouble of her own, 22 years old and already invisible. The voices faded as I made my way through the corridors. The wine buzzed pleasantly in my veins, making everything soft-edged and dreamlike. West wing, 3rd door on the left. I could do this. For once in my life, I was being daring, walking through these grand hallways like I belonged here. The heat pressed against my skin. Summer had turned the palace into an oven. My dress clung to my back. I felt flushed and dizzy and reckless and alive. The chambers were empty when I arrived. I stood in the doorway and stared. The room was enormous, far too grand for a mere guest. Tapestries lined the walls depicting battles I didn't recognize. A massive bed dominated one corner, draped in dark fabric. And there in the center of the room, catching the last honey gold light from the windows, stood a bath already drawn. The water looked cool, inviting, still as glass. I had never in my 22 years had a bath like that. In the servants' quarters, we shared 2 large tubs, the water reused until it ran gray. I bathed once a week if I was lucky, twice if someone didn't need the time more than I did. Even then it was quick, efficient, never luxurious. The voice in my head, wine-warm and persuasive, whispered, They called you boring. No one thinks you'd ever dare anything. My hands found the laces of my dress before I decided to move. The fabric fell away. The air on my skin felt like freedom, like shedding more than just cloth. The bath was right there waiting, and I was being daring. This was what brave people did, wasn't it? They took what they wanted. Just once. Just this once, I got in. The water was perfect. Cool enough to soothe my flushed skin, deep enough to cover my shoulders. I sank down and made a sound that probably wasn't dignified, but I was alone, so it didn't matter. I closed my eyes and let myself float in the silence, in the impossible luxury of it all. When I opened them, a man stood in the doorway. Not just stood, filled. His shoulders nearly brushed the frame on either side. He was the largest man I'd ever seen, built like something that should have been carved from stone instead of born. An alpha. I could feel it even through the wine haze, the power rolling off him in waves, making the air feel thick and charged. He was also the most beautiful man I'd ever seen in my life. Dark hair slightly disheveled, like he'd been running his hands through it. Dark eyes that were currently locked on me with an expression of complete and total shock. His face was all clean lines and stark planes, the kind of face that made you forget how to breathe, how to think. He looked very surprised to find me there. It was adorable. "Who are you?" he asked. His voice was deep and rough, not shouted but quiet, controlled, slightly strangled. Like he was using every ounce of his considerable control not to do something else entirely. I giggled. I couldn't help it. The wine and the surprise and the sheer absurdity of the situation bubbled up in my chest. "What are you doing in my bath?" he continued, and now his voice had dropped lower, almost a growl. He looked tense, so very tense. I could see it in the set of his shoulders, the way he held himself perfectly still, like he was restraining something enormous. The wine-soaked part of my brain supplied helpfully that he was an alpha, and alphas needed to relax. Baths were relaxing. I was very relaxed. If he got in the bath with me, he'd relax too. Also, he'd be naked, which seemed like an excellent development. "Well," he demanded, his voice even lower, "I asked you a question." I opened my mouth. I fully intended to say something helpful and appropriate. What came out instead was, "You should get in." I patted the water beside me, smiling up at him. The man went completely still. Not the stillness of calm, the stillness of a predator that's just spotted prey and is deciding whether to pounce. His eyes, I noticed, had gone very dark. His breathing had changed deeper, more deliberate, and there was something in the air between us now. Something that made my skin feel too tight, made heat pool low in my belly despite the cool water. He took one step into the room, then another. His gaze never left my face. "Princess," he said carefully, and there was something in his voice I couldn't identify. Warning, maybe, or wonder. "You're drunk." Princess. He thought I was the princess. Isolde. Of course he did. Who else would dare be in a visiting lord's chambers? Who else would have the audacity to use a king's private bath? The wine made everything feel soft and dreamlike. I should probably correct him. Tell him I was just Brynn, just a kitchen maid who'd wandered drunkenly into the wrong room. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just smiled up at him, wondering distantly why my heart was beating so hard, why there was a warmth spreading through my chest that had nothing to do with the wine. "Are you not?" he asked, frowning slightly. I drew myself up with tipsy dignity. "Absolutely, my lord, your princess." I tried to stand to offer a proper greeting, but the bath and the wine conspired against me. I began tilting sideways. He moved before I could fall. One moment he was across the room. The next his hand caught my arm, steady and sure, pulling me upright. His touch sent sparks across my skin. I could feel the heat of his palm through the water, the carefully controlled strength in his fingers. "Easy," he said quietly, and his other hand came up to steady my shoulder. He was so close now I could see every detail of his face. The faint scar cutting through his left eyebrow. The exact color of his eyes, darker than I'd thought, almost black in this light. The way he was looking at me like I was something precious and breakable and entirely unexpected. His eyes dropped for just a fraction of a second, taking in the situation, then immediately returned to my face. His jaw tightened. His hands remained exactly where they were, proper and careful, even though I could feel the tension radiating through him. He reached for something, keeping one hand on my arm to steady me. A moment later, heavy fabric settled around my shoulders. His cloak. It smelled like him, like leather and pine, and something darker, something that made me want to press my face into it and breathe deep. "Come on," he said, his voice rough. "Let's get you somewhere safe before you drown yourself." I wrapped my arms around his neck without thinking, trusting him completely. He lifted me like I weighed nothing at all. I pressed against his chest, felt the solid wall of muscle, the steady beat of his heart under my cheek. Something clicked into place, like a door opening in my chest that I hadn't known was locked. Warmth bloomed there, bright and certain and completely foreign. Not the wine, something else. Something that felt like coming home to a place I'd never been. He carried me to the bed and set me down carefully, then immediately stepped back, putting proper distance between us. His hands were shaking slightly. I could see it when he curled them into fists at his sides. "You're warm," I said, wonder in my voice. He made a sound that might have been a laugh or a groan. "You need to sleep this off." But I could see it now in the way he was looking at me. Like I'd done something to him, like I'd reached inside his chest and rearranged everything. The feeling in my chest grew stronger, warmer, like sunlight, like safety, like everything I'd never known I was missing. "What's your name?" I asked. "Caspian," he said after a pause. "I'm King Caspian of Stormhaven." The king, the terrifying king everyone whispered about. The one who'd supposedly killed a man for looking at him wrong, who looked at me like I was made of light. "You were lonely," I said softly because somehow I could feel it. The ache in him, the way he'd been waiting for something, someone, and no one had come. "You've been lonely for so long," he went very still. "How did you—" "I'm sorry," I interrupted, reaching up to touch his face. My fingers found his jaw, rough with stubble, warm and solid and real. "I'm sorry you were lonely." His hand came up, covering mine, holding it against his cheek. His eyes closed briefly, and I felt him shake. "I think I love you a little bit," I mumbled, the wine and the exhaustion catching up with me all at once. "Isn't that silly?" His eyes opened. He stared at me like I'd just told him the sun had risen in the west. "Sleep," he said quietly. "We'll talk in the morning." But I was already drifting, wrapped in his cloak, surrounded by his scent, that warmth in my chest, pulsing steady as a heartbeat. The last thing I heard was his voice, so soft I might have imagined it. "Not silly at all." Morning arrived like a betrayal. Light stabbed through my eyelids. My head felt like someone had taken a mallet to it repeatedly. My mouth tasted like regret and and poor life choices. I became aware of several things simultaneously. I was in a bed, a very large, very comfortable bed. I was wearing someone's cloak and nothing else. And there was an enormous man asleep approximately 6 inches away. Memory crashed over me in waves. The wine, the dare, the bath. Oh gods, the bath. My eyes flew open. I didn't breathe, didn't move, just stared at the man beside me. Even in sleep, he was almost aggressively beautiful. His face had relaxed, softened. One arm was stretched out on the pillow above his head. Dark hair fell across his forehead. His chest rose and fell with deep, even breaths. King Caspian of Stormhaven. The terrifying warrior everyone whispered about, who I'd told to get in the bath with me, who I'd told I loved. The horror of it all crystallized with perfect, awful clarity. I moved with glacial precision, my heart trying to hammer its way out of my chest. Inch by inch, I slid toward the edge of the bed. The floor was cold under my bare feet. My dress lay in a puddle where I'd dropped it. I pulled it on without bothering to lace it properly, my hands shaking so badly I could barely manage the fabric. His cloak was pooled on the floor. I picked it up, folded it carefully because he'd been kind to me, and it felt important to honor that. I set it on the chair by the window. One last look at him. I couldn't help it. In sleep, he looked younger, peaceful, like he'd found something he'd been searching for his whole life. My chest ached. Then I was at the door into the corridor, walking fast enough that it was almost running, but not quite, because running would draw attention, and I couldn't afford attention right now. The servants' quarters were blessedly quiet. Most people were still asleep or already at their morning duties. I made it to my small room without seeing anyone who mattered. Closed the door, leaned against it, breathed. The memories wouldn't stop, his hand steadying me, his voice rough and careful. The way he'd looked at me like I was something precious. "You should get in. I think I love you a little bit." My face burned. I pressed my palms against my cheeks, trying to cool the heat, the shame spiraling through me. It was fine. It would be fine. He thought I was Princess Isolde. By now, he'd probably realized his mistake. Or he'd ask Isolde about it, and she'd smooth it over somehow, and I would never have to see him again. I'd go back to the kitchens, back to my normal life, back to being invisible. This would become a story I'd never ever tell anyone. The plan lasted approximately 20 minutes. I was heading to the kitchens when I heard the voices. Two stewards walking quickly, their voices pitched low but urgent. The whole West Wing is in chaos, the first one said. What happened? The second asked. The king, King Caspian. Apparently Princess Isolde went to his chambers last night. My feet stopped moving. The princess alone. Drunk, they're saying, stumbling like a sailor, and she fell asleep in his bed. The world tilted slightly. That doesn't sound like her at all. Someone said she was naked, in his bath. The king found her there. The stewards turned a corner, their voices fading. I stood frozen in the middle of the corridor, my mind trying to process what I just heard. They were talking about me, about last night, but they thought it was Isolde, which meant Caspian still thought it was Isolde, which meant West Wing I thought distantly. They said West Wing, but Madame Voss had she said West Wing or East Wing? Madame Voss had definitely said East Wing. Third door on the left, except I'd been drunk and I'd gone to the West Wing instead. To the third door on the left, to the king's chambers. I'd gotten into the king's bath. I'd asked the king to get in with me. I'd told the king I loved him, and he thought I was Princess Isolde. He was looking for Isolde right now, looking for the woman he thought had spent the night in his bed, looking for the woman he thought was his intended. Oh no, I said very quietly. My legs moved without my permission. I ran. I made it to a small courtyard tucked behind the laundry buildings before my body gave out. I pressed my back against the sun-warmed stone and tried to catch my breath, tried to think through the panic. This was bad. This was so much worse than embarrassing. This was "There you are," a voice said. I spun around. The woman standing at the courtyard entrance was tall, elegant, and beautiful in the way of people who'd always known they were beautiful. She had dark hair pulled back in an intricate style, sharp eyes, and a presence that made me feel like a child caught stealing sweets. Princess Isolde. I'd seen her before, of course, everyone had, but I'd never been this close. Never noticed how we had similar coloring, similar builds. The same heart-shaped face, the same brown eyes, the same mouth, except she was everything I wasn't. Educated, elegant, royal. Your Highness, I managed dropping into the worst curtsy of my life. I know what you did, Isolde said. My mouth went dry. Last night, she continued, her voice perfectly level. You drank wine, quite a lot of it. Then you entered a lord's chambers and got into his bath. She took a step closer. Except it wasn't just a lord, it was King Caspian, my intended. I made a small sound of distress, which means, Isolde said softly, that King Caspian, the man I am supposed to marry, the man my father has spent 6 months negotiating an alliance with, believes that you, a servant girl, or me, Princess Isolde, his fiancée. Your Highness, I didn't mean. I started falling to my knees. Isolde raised one elegant hand. My mouth closed. Do you understand the political implications of this? My father and King Caspian's council have been negotiating this marriage for months. It's meant to end the border conflicts, open trade routes, prevent further bloodshed. She paused. And you may have just destroyed all of it. I'm sorry, I whispered. I'm so sorry. I never would have. When the truth comes out, Isolde interrupted, there will be consequences. What kind of consequences? I asked, though I didn't want to know. For you, Isolde's voice went colder. At minimum, you'll never work in a noble house again. My breath caught. More likely, my father will want to make an example of you. Impersonating a royal is a serious crime. Prison, years of it. The sun felt too hot. I couldn't breathe properly. And if my father is particularly angry, Isolde continued, he might declare it treason. The word hung in the warm morning air. They don't send you to prison for treason, Isolde said simply. I understood. My hands were shaking. They'd execute me, hang me in the square as a warning to others. My life, already so small and meaningless, would end on a scaffold. Please, I heard myself say. Please, I didn't mean to. I was just. I know, Isolde said, and her voice gentled slightly. I believe you. She took another step closer, and I could see something in her face now, not anger, something else, something that looked almost like desperation. Unfortunately, what you meant doesn't matter. What matters is what happened, and what's going to happen next. I waited, hardly daring to breathe. There might be another option, Isolde said slowly. Hope flared in my chest, painful and bright. Anything, I heard myself say. I'll do anything. Isolde looked at me for a long moment. Then she held out her hand. Come with me. We need to talk privately. The princess's chambers were nothing like I'd imagined. Elegant, yes, but also surprisingly sparse. Books lined one wall, A desk sat by the window covered in papers. It looked like a room where someone actually lived and worked, not just a showpiece for royal visitors. Isolde gestured to a chair. I sat my back ramrod straight, my hands clasped in my lap to hide their trembling. "I'm going to tell you something," Isolde said, settling into the chair across from me, "and I need you to listen carefully." I nodded. "I don't want to marry King Caspian." The words fell into the space between us like stones into still water. "I can't tell my father that. If I refuse, he'll see it as disobedience, as endangering the alliance. He won't hear me." Isolde's hands twisted in her lap. It was the first ungraceful thing I'd seen her do. "The only way this marriage doesn't happen is if King Caspian ends it himself." Understanding began to dawn cold and terrible. "You want me to continue, I said slowly, "to keep pretending I'm you?" "Yes." "And make him not want to marry you?" "Yes." I stared at her. "How? Be yourself," Isolde said. "Be clumsy, be inappropriate, be everything a future queen shouldn't be. Make him lose interest." "But what about when he finds out the truth?" "He won't, not if we're careful. You look enough like me that from a distance in the right clothes, no one will question it. And I'll make sure we're never in the same room at the same time." "This is insane," I said. "I know. If we're caught, we won't be, not if you do exactly as I say." My mind was racing. This was madness, absolute madness, but the alternative was prison, or worse, and there was something else, something I didn't want to examine too closely. The memory of Caspian's hand steadying me, his voice soft in the darkness, the warmth that had bloomed in my chest when he looked at me. "Why?" I asked. "Why don't you want to marry him? Everyone says he's a good king, strong, fair." Isolde's face did something complicated. "There's someone else," she said quietly, "someone I love, but he's not suitable, not in my father's eyes." "I'm sorry," I said and meant it. We sat in silence for a moment. "Will you do it?" Isolde asked. I thought about prison, about never seeing daylight again, about being made an example of my name used to frighten other servants into obedience. I thought about Caspian's eyes, the way he'd held me so carefully, the warmth in my chest that I'd never felt before and didn't understand. "Yes," I said, "I'll do it." Isolde's shoulders dropped with visible relief. "Thank you. What happens first?" "First we get you ready. He's requested dinner with me tonight. You'll go in my place. And then you make him regret ever asking for my hand." The dress was beautiful, pale blue silk that caught the light like water. Isolde's maids had laced it tight, arranged my hair in an elaborate style that made my neck feel exposed and vulnerable. I stared at my reflection and barely recognized myself. "Remember," Isolde said from behind me, "address him as Your Majesty. Keep your responses brief, and for God's sake try to seem disinterested." I nodded. My hands were shaking. "You'll be fine," Isolde said, though she didn't sound entirely convinced. The walk to the private dining room felt like walking to my execution. My heart hammered against my ribs. The dress was too tight. I couldn't breathe properly. The guards opened the doors. Caspian stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back. He turned when I entered, and the look on his face made me forget every instruction Isolde had given me. He looked at me like I was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. "Princess," he said, and his voice was soft, careful, like he was afraid of frightening me. I tried to curtsy. It was terrible, wobbly, and lopsided, nothing like the elegant curtsy Isolde had demonstrated. "Your Highness," I said, then immediately winced. "I mean, Your Majesty, I'm so sorry. Oh, gods, I'm so sorry." His expression gentled even further. "It's quite all right. You may address me by my first name if you wish." I stared at him, my mouth slightly open. "I shouldn't," I managed. "Your Majesty." He studied me. I could feel the weight of his gaze, the way he was taking in every detail. "Looking for the woman from last night." "Are you all right?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. Yes, why, well, you seem nervous." I was nervous, terrified actually, but not for the reasons he thought. "I'm fine," I lied. He continued to look at me with concern. Then very slowly he offered his arm. "Shall we?" I placed my fingers on his sleeve, felt the solid warmth of him beneath the fabric. That same warmth from last night bloomed in my chest again, impossible to ignore. He led me to the table, pulled out my chair with careful courtesy. I sat, and he took his seat across from me. The table was set beautifully. Candles, flowers, too many pieces of silverware. I stared at the array of forks and knives and felt panic rise. I had no idea which one to use first. In the servants' hall, we had one fork, one knife, and you used them for everything. Is something wrong? Caspian asked. No, I said quickly. Too quickly. Everything is lovely. He watched me for another moment, then gestured to a servant. Would you like some wine? My eyes went wide. Your Majesty, I'm so sorry. Last night, I didn't mean to. I should never have gotten in your bath. And then I fell asleep, and you were so kind, and I was so inappropriate, and I was spiraling. I could hear it happening, but I couldn't stop. Please, he said, and there was something in his voice that made me pause. Please don't be embarrassed. I looked at him. He leaned forward slightly. I was absolutely enchanted. The words didn't make sense. You were, how could I not be? He smiled, and it transformed his entire face. You were, he trailed off as if searching for the right word. Drunk, I supplied weakly. Honest, he said. Unguarded. Beautiful. The warmth in my chest expanded, filled my lungs, made it hard to breathe. And this morning when I woke and you were gone, he continued, his voice dropping lower. I have been counting the minutes until I could see you again. I should say something to push him away, to make him lose interest. That was the plan, but he was looking at me like I'd hung the moon, and all I could think was that the warmth in my chest felt like it was trying to reach toward him. I thought of you too, I admitted, Your Majesty. The words were out before I could stop them. True and terrifying. He stood, moved around the table, and crouched beside my chair so our eyes were level. I felt something last night, he said quietly. Here. He pressed one hand to his chest. A warmth, a certainty, like something inside me recognized something inside you. My breath stopped. Did you feel it too, he asked. I couldn't lie, not about this. Not when that same warmth was currently trying to crawl out of my chest and into his hands. Yes, I whispered. His eyes closed briefly. When they opened again, there was something fierce and tender in them. Then you know, he said. You know what this is. I didn't. I had no idea what this feeling was, this pull toward him that felt as natural as gravity. A bond, he said softly. A mate bond, rare, sacred. I never thought I'd find mine. A mate bond. The words should have terrified me. Instead, they felt right, like finally having a name for something I'd felt all my life without knowing it existed. I don't understand, I managed. You will, he promised. We have time. He stood, offered his hand. I took it without thinking, let him pull me to my feet. We were standing very close now. I could see the exact color of his eyes, dark brown with flecks of gold. Could smell his scent, leather and pine, and something uniquely him. I know this must be overwhelming, he said. We can take this slowly. I want you to be comfortable, to feel safe with me. Safe. The words settled into my chest alongside the warmth. I thought about Isolde's instructions. Make him lose interest, be inappropriate, push him away. I couldn't do it. Not while he was looking at me like this. Not while that warmth in my chest was singing. Would you like to have dinner? He asked gently. I nodded, not trusting my voice. We ate. I tried to focus on the food, on using the right fork, on not spilling anything. But all I could think about was the way he looked at me. Like I was precious. Like I mattered. Like I was exactly who he'd been waiting for. And the warmth in my chest grew brighter, stronger, until it felt like its own kind of truth. This was a mistake. All of this was a terrible, dangerous mistake. But when Caspian smiled at me across the table, when he reached over to gently touch my hand, when he said my name, Isolde's name, with such tenderness I couldn't bring myself to care. Just for tonight, I thought. Just for one night, I'd let myself have this. Tomorrow, I'd figure out how to make him stop loving me. Tonight, I'd let myself pretend that someone like him could love someone like me. The warmth in my chest pulsed steady as a second heartbeat. And somewhere deep inside, in a place I didn't want to examine, I wondered if I'd just made the best mistake of my life. Or the worst. The plan should have been simple. Court Princess Isolde carefully. Build trust. Create a foundation for a marriage that would secure peace between our kingdoms. I'd done harder things. Led armies into battle at 22. Rebuilt a kingdom from the ashes of my father's fear. Surely I could manage one political marriage. Except she wasn't what I expected. The woman who appeared in my chambers that first night, drunk, laughing, utterly unguarded, had reached inside my chest and rearranged everything. I'd felt the mate bond snap into place the moment I touched her. That warmth, that certainty. After 30 years of being alone, I'd finally found her. And now, 5 days later, I was watching her try to sabotage our relationship, and it was breaking my heart. Your Majesty, she said, approaching me in the garden, where I was reviewing supply reports with Captain Torvin. Her voice was uncertain, like she was forcing herself forward. I would like, if it isn't too much trouble. I dismissed Torvin with a glance and gave her my full attention. Could I possibly have shoes? The word came out small, uncertain. Nothing like the confidence I'd felt from her through the bond when she'd stumbled into my bath and told me to get in. How many? I asked, trying to hide my smile. I don't. Whatever you think is appropriate. I wanted to tell her she could have anything, everything, the entire kingdom if she asked for it. Instead, I simply said, I'll see to it. Within the hour, I'd sent for the finest shoemaker in the city, 20 pairs of slippers, matching jewelry, dresses that would make her eyes shine. I added a note, crossed out the last line 3 times before leaving it. Wear whichever you like, though I suspect you'd be beautiful in anything. Through the bond, I felt her confusion when the gifts arrived. Her guilt. She thought she was manipulating me, testing my generosity. She had no idea that every awkward attempt to push me away only made me love her more. She can't play, I told my steward when he mentioned that the pianoforte in my chambers might please the princess. Your Majesty, Princess Isolde, she mentioned she's not accomplished in music. I'd felt her panic through the bond when she'd seen the instrument. But I'd like her to feel comfortable. Perhaps we could arrange for lessons. That evening when she arrived for tea, her eyes went straight to the pianoforte. Do you play? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Yes, she said, and I felt the lie through the bond like a knife. She sat, placed her hands on the keys, and played. What followed was enthusiastic, utterly without skill, but she threw herself into it with such determination that I couldn't help but smile. This was my mate, brave enough to face her fear, honest enough to be terrible at something without pretending otherwise. When she finished, she turned to face my judgment, her chin lifted in defiance. I've never heard anything quite like that, I said truthfully. You're laughing at me. I'm not. I crossed the room, sat beside her on the bench, close enough that I could smell her scent, something sweet and simple that the expensive perfumes Isolde wore couldn't quite cover. You're enchanting. No matter what you do, you've completely bewitched me. I reached up, brushed a strand of hair from her face. My fingers lingered against her cheek. Through the bond, I felt her pulse quicken, felt her want sharp and bright before she smothered it with fear. Play something else, I said softly. I'll help. I guided her hands, my fingers warm over hers. I could barely concentrate on the melody. All I could feel was her presence, solid and real beside me, her scent surrounding me, her breath against my shoulder as she leaned close. The bond between us pulsed bright and insistent. When we finished the simple tune, I didn't move away. There, I murmured. Beautiful. I meant her, not the music. The walk through the garden should have been simple. Pleasant conversation, fresh air, a chance to know each other better. Instead, I was trying very hard not to lose control. She was wearing a dress that Isolde's maids had laced too tight. I could see it in the way she breathed shallow and quick, in the flush on her cheeks that had nothing to do with the summer heat. Are you all right? I asked, moderating my stride to match hers. Yes, she lied. It's lovely. Through the bond, I felt her discomfort, her growing dizziness. Not as lovely as you, I said, and watched her make that small sound that went straight through me. We turned down a narrower path. The servants who'd been following fell back, giving us privacy. We were essentially alone. Her breathing was getting shorter. Through the bond, I felt her vision starting to blur. Then she collapsed. I caught her before she hit the ground, my arm around her waist, pulling her against me. The bond flared bright with protective instinct. Mine. My mate. Hurt. Fix it. Your corset is too tight, I managed, my voice strained. I could smell her leather and pine mixing with her natural sweetness, could feel every curve pressed against me. The bond was screaming at me to claim her, to make her mine, to never let her go. I called for assistance, but we were too far down the path. No one answered. May I, I asked, though I wasn't sure I could stop if she said no. She nodded, trust absolute in her eyes. My hands moved to the laces at the front of her bodice. I worked the knots carefully, trying to ignore how my fingers trembled, trying to ignore the way her breath hitched when my knuckles brushed the swell of her breast. When the laces loosened enough, she pulled in a full, deep breath. The sound she made was almost a moan. Every instinct I possessed roared to life. I wanted to tear the rest of the dress away, wanted to lay her down in the flowers and learn every inch of her with my mouth. Wanted to hear her make that sound again and again until neither of us could breathe. The wolf inside me pushed against my control, demanding I claim what was mine. Better, I asked, and my voice came out rough. She nodded, still leaning against me. I retied the laces slower than necessary, savoring every moment of contact. When I finished, I didn't step back immediately. Neither did she. The garden around us was silent except for the distant sound of fountains. Roses bloomed heavy on their stems. The air was thick with heat and honey-sweet fragrance. She looked up at me and I saw the moment my control fractured. I bent my head. She rose on her toes. Our lips met in the space between. The kiss started gentle questioning. My hand came up to cup her face, thumb stroking her cheekbone. She made a sound, soft and needy, and my other arm came around her waist, pulling her closer. The gentleness burned away. My mouth was demanding now, claiming. She fisted her hands in my shirt, pulling me down to her. The bond flared so bright I could feel it in my bones, in my blood, demanding more everything. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, I pressed my forehead to hers. I should apologize, I said, my voice wrecked. Don't, she whispered. Through the bond, I felt her want, her love, and underneath it a terror that made my chest ache. She was falling for me, and it was killing her. That evening, I stood in my chambers and tried to understand what was happening. Through the bond, I could feel her emotions clearly now, the love bright and undeniable, but also fear, guilt, self-loathing. She thought she was manipulating me, thought she was playing a part, but I felt the truth in every heartbeat we shared through the bond. She loved me, completely, desperately. So why was she trying so hard to push me away? Your Majesty, Torvin said from the doorway, you asked to see me. What do you know about Princess Isolde? I asked. Torvin's expression became carefully neutral. She's well-educated, accomplished, well-liked by her people. And there have been rumors. What kind of rumors? Torvin hesitated. That she's been seen in the company of a palace scholar, a commoner named Thomas. Nothing confirmed, of course. I stared at him. She's in love with someone else. I couldn't say, Your Majesty. But I knew. Through the bond I'd felt Isolde's, my mate's, desperation. Her fear. She wasn't trying to escape me. She was trying to escape a marriage to protect someone. Or something. Thank you, Torvin. That will be all. When he left, I stood at the window and watched the sunset over the gardens. My mate was lying to me, pretending to be someone she wasn't, trying desperately to make me end an engagement I'd never wanted in the first place. The question was why 2 weeks passed. 2 weeks of watching her try to be demanding and fail. 2 weeks of feeling her love through the bond, even as she tried to hide it. 2 weeks of falling deeper in love with every awkward curtsy, every terrible piano performance, every moment she looked at me like I was her whole world. And through it all, I felt something else, a darkness growing in her, a despair that had nothing to do with me. One evening, I found her in the library. She was staring at a book, tears streaming down her face. What's wrong? I asked, dropping to my knees beside her chair. Through the bond, I felt her pain, sharp and overwhelming. I can't read it, she whispered. Not properly. I know some words, but the fancy ones. She looked at me, her eyes devastated. How can I be a queen when I can't even read a treaty? Understanding dawned. She wasn't Princess Isolde. She couldn't be. Isolde had been educated from birth. But my mate, who are you? I asked gently. She flinched. What? Your real name, not the one you've been using. Your real name. Through the bond, I felt her terror. Don't lie to me, I said softly. Please. I can feel it when you lie. It hurts. She stared at me for a long moment. Then quietly, Brynn, my name is Brynn. Brynn, I repeated, and the name felt right on my tongue. That's beautiful. I'm not a princess, she said, the words rushing out now. I'm nobody. I'm just a kitchen maid who got drunk and wandered into the wrong room and became my mate. I finished. She looked at me with such hope and fear that my heart broke. I know you're not Isolde, I said. I've known for a while. The bond doesn't lie, Brynn. You feel different than you should. You smell different. You act different. Why didn't you say anything? Because I was waiting for you to trust me enough to tell me the truth. I took her hands. And because I don't care who you were before I met you, you're my mate. That's all that matters. Your counsel can learn to accept it. Ancient law is clear. The mate bond supersedes everything. But Isolde made a deal with you. Didn't she ask you to impersonate her to end the engagement? Brynn nodded miserably. Why'd you love someone else? A scholar. But her father won't let her marry him. I stood paced to the window. Through the bond, I felt Brynn's fear that I would reject her now, cast her aside. I'm ending the engagement, I said. What? With Isolde. I'm ending it. I'll speak to her father tomorrow. The alliance doesn't require a marriage. We can negotiate new terms. But I turned back to her. I want to marry you, Brynn. My mate, my equal. Not some princess I barely know. Through the bond, I felt her joy, her disbelief, her love, and underneath it all, a fear so profound, it made me pause. What aren't you telling me? I asked. She looked away. Nothing. Brynn. I crossed to her, tilted her chin up. No more lies. Please. Through the bond, I felt her internal struggle. Then finally she whispered, Isolde is dying. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. What? Terminal illness. She has maybe 4 months left. Brynn's voice was steady despite the tears. That's why she doesn't want to marry you. She's trying to protect you from watching her die. Through the bond, I felt Brynn's anguish. Her guilt at being part of this deception. Her terror that I would choose duty over love. And she asked you to continue the charade, I said slowly. To make me end the engagement myself. Yes. Even though it's killing you to push me away. Brynn nodded. I pulled her to her feet, wrapped her in my arms. No more, I said firmly. Tomorrow we tell the truth, all of it. To Isolde's father, to the council, to everyone. They'll execute me for impersonating a royal over my dead body. I pulled back to look at her. You're my mate, Brynn. I will fight entire kingdoms to keep you safe. Do you understand? Through the bond, I felt her love wash over me, pure and absolute. I understand, she whispered. That night I held her in my chambers. We didn't make love, not yet, not while she was still tangled in Isolde's web, but I held her and told her about my childhood, about the loneliness, about the desperate hope I'd felt when I'd found my mate. I've been alone my whole life, I told her. Until you. She wrapped her arms around me tighter. I love you, she said. I know I've said it before, drunk and stupid. But I mean it. I love you, Caspian. I know, I said. I've felt it through the bond every day. It's the only thing that's kept me sane while you've been trying to push me away. She laughed wetly against my chest. Tomorrow, I promised. Tomorrow we fix this. But we didn't get the chance. I woke the next morning to Torvin pounding on my door. Your Majesty, it's Princess Isolde. She's announced her illness publicly. The whole court knows. I was on my feet immediately. Where's Brynn? Gone. She left before dawn. One of the maids said she was heading back to the servants' quarters. Through the bond, I felt her terror, her certainty that I would choose duty over love, that I would marry Isolde out of pity. Find her, I ordered. Bring her to me. Now. But Torvin shook his head. There's more. Isolde has confessed to the deception. She's taken full responsibility, said she blackmailed Brynn into impersonating her. My heart stopped. The king is demanding Brynn's arrest. He's calling for her execution. Through the bond, I felt Brynn's fear spike into terror. Where is she? I demanded. We don't know. She ran when she heard the guards were coming. I was out the door before Torvin finished speaking, following the bond like a compass. She was terrified, running, and I was going to find her before anyone else did, because she was my mate, and I would burn this entire kingdom to ash before I let anyone hurt her. I found her in the old stables, pressed into a corner behind stacks of hay, trying to make herself invisible. Through the bond, I felt her terror spike when she saw me. Brynn, I said softly. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I'm so sorry. I'll leave. I'll go far away and you can marry Isolde and I won't cause any more problems. I was across the space in 2 strides, pulling her into my arms. You're not going anywhere, I said firmly. Do you understand me? You're my mate, my future queen, and I'm not letting you go. Your council can learn to accept it. The king demands my execution. Over my dead body. Through the bond, I pushed love at her. Certainty, mine, safe, protected. But Isolde is dying, she whispered. Doesn't she deserve? Isolde deserves to spend her remaining time with the man she loves, not trapped in a political marriage she never wanted. I pulled back to look at her mum, and you deserve to be with me, your mate, the man who loves you more than life itself. You love me, she sounded amazed, as if the bond hadn't been broadcasting my feelings for weeks. With everything I am, I said, from the moment you stumbled drunk into my bath and told me to get in with you. She laughed through her tears. Now, I said, standing and pulling her to her feet, We're going to go face the court together, and we're going to fight for our right to be together. How? Ancient law. Mate bonds supersede blood law. I've already had Torvin research the precedent. I laced our fingers together. The bond chose you, Brynn. That makes you my equal in the eyes of the law. Princess or servant, it doesn't matter. Through the bond, I felt her hope bloom. Do you trust me? I asked. Yes, she said without hesitation. Then let's go claim our future. The throne room was packed. King Edmund sat on his throne, his face thunderous. Isolde stood to one side, pale but defiant. The entire court had gathered to witness my humiliation, or so they thought. I walked in with Brynn's hand in mine. Gasps rippled through the crowd. King Caspian, Edmund said coldly, I see you found the servant girl who dared impersonate my daughter. I've found my mate, I corrected. Brynn, who had the courage to help a dying woman escape an unwanted marriage. More gasps. She committed treason. She committed an act of compassion at Princess Isolde's request. I looked at Isolde. Isn't that correct, Your Highness? Isolde stepped forward. It is. I blackmailed Brynn into helping me. She agreed because I threatened her with execution. Everything that happened is my responsibility, not hers. You had no right. I had every right, Isolde's voice cracked. You wouldn't listen when I tried to tell you about my illness. You just kept pushing for this marriage. I had to do something. Edmund's face crumpled. You should have told me. Would it have changed anything? Tears streamed down Isolde's face. Would you have let me choose how to spend my last months? Silence fell. I cleared my throat. Your Majesty, I'm formally ending my engagement to Princess Isolde, by mutual agreement. But the alliance doesn't require a marriage. We can renegotiate trade agreements, border protections, military alliances. I'm willing to work with you on all of it. Edmund looked between us, clearly struggling. As for Brynn, I continued and squeezed her hand, I intend to marry her. Because of the mate bond, yes. But more than that, because I love her. Because she ran into danger to save me. Because she's brave and kind and exactly who I want standing beside me. She's a servant, one of the advisors protested. Through the bond, I felt Brynn flinch. She's my mate, I said flatly. Ancient law is clear. Mate bonds supersede blood law. The bond chose her. That makes her my equal. Ancient law also requires. A door opened at the back of the room. A young man in scholar's robes hurried in carrying a massive tome. Forgive the interruption, he said, bowing to the assembled kings, but I believe I can clarify the legal standing. Thomas, Isolde breathed. The scholar Thomas set his book on a table and flipped to a marked page. The law is clear, he said. When a mate bond is recognized between an alpha and their chosen, that bond takes precedence over all other considerations. Title, birth, wealth, none of it matters. The mate is to be accepted as the alpha's equal in all things. He looked up, met Isolde's eyes. I've been researching this for years, because I hoped, he paused, because I hoped it might apply to those of us who found love outside our prescribed stations. Thomas, Edmund said slowly, are you saying, I love your daughter? Thomas said quietly. I know I'm nobody, just a palace scholar, but I couldn't let her die thinking I never fought for her. Through the bond, I felt Brynn's emotions shift. Recognition, hope, the realization that we weren't alone in this fight. Your Majesty, I said to Edmund, the world is changing. Your daughter is dying. Are you really going to spend her last months fighting about who she's allowed to love? Edmund sat down heavily. He looked old suddenly, tired. Is there anything else I don't know? He asked. The food shortage in the northern province can be solved by rerouting 2 trade convoys, Brynn said quietly. Everyone turned to stare at her. Through the bond, I felt her courage as she continued. I used to work in the kitchens. I know how food distribution works. If you redirect the southern convoys north, you'd have enough grain to last through winter. One of the advisors leaned forward. That might actually work. I looked at Edmund. See, she already thinks like a queen. Edmund stared at his daughter, at Thomas, at Brynn and me. Very well, he said finally. The engagement is dissolved. King Caspian, you may marry your mate. But she undergoes training first. I won't have people say we're entirely without standards. Agreed, I said. Edmund turned to Isolde. And you, if you want to spend your time with this scholar, do it properly. Marry him with full honors. Isolde's hands flew to her mouth. Father, I won't have my daughter die unwed, Edmund said gruffly, even if it's to a commoner. Through the bond, I felt Brynn's joy, her relief, her love. I pulled her close and whispered, see, I told you we'd fight for our future. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. I love you. I know, I said and kissed her. The court erupted in whispers, but I didn't care. I had my mate, and nothing else mattered. The weeks that followed were a blur of preparation. 2 weddings. Isolde and Thomas married first in a small ceremony that made Isolde glow despite her declining health. Then as the sun set, Brynn and I exchanged our vows. She walked down the aisle alone, head high, wearing a dress Isolde had commissioned. Around her neck, the pendant I'd given her, a wolf and a rose intertwined. When she reached me, I took her hands. You came, I said. Always, she promised. Through the bond, I felt her love pure and absolute. The ceremony was brief, the vows simple. When we kissed, the bond between us sang so brightly that several people swore they saw light. At the reception, I pulled her aside. Are you happy? I asked. Through the bond, I felt her answer before she spoke. More than I ever thought possible, she said. You gave me everything I never knew I wanted. No, I corrected. You gave yourself permission to want it. I just happened to benefit. She laughed and pulled me down for another kiss. 6 months later, I stood in the council room and watched my mate verbally dismantle Lord Brennan's tariff proposal. The solution is obvious, she said, interrupting him mid-sentence. Reduce grain tariffs by half. Increase luxury good tariffs by a third. Fund better roads with the difference. Better roads mean faster transport, fresher food, lower costs overall. She looked around the table. Everyone wins except silk importers. I think we'll survive. Several advisors nodded in agreement. Through the bond, I felt her satisfaction, her growing confidence. After the meeting, I pulled her into a corridor. You're magnificent, I said, backing her against the wall. Is that a complaint? It's worship. I kissed her thoroughly. Have I mentioned today that I love you? Not in the last hour. Grievous oversight. I kissed her again. I love you, you're brilliant and fierce, and you make me absurdly happy. Through the bond, I felt her contentment, and something else. Nervousness. What's wrong? I asked. Nothing's wrong, I have news. Through the bond, I felt her anticipation. Good news or bad news? That depends on how you feel about sleepless nights and dirty nappies. My brain stuttered, then caught up. You're pregnant? Yes, she smiled. Surprise. Through the bond, her joy crashed into mine and magnified. I picked her up and spun her around, laughing. We're having a baby, I said wonderingly. We are. I set her down, carefully cupped her face. Thank you, I said, for stumbling drunk into my bath, for being terrible at piano, for loving me enough to fight for us. Through the bond, I pushed love at her. Gratitude, mine, forever. Always, she whispered, and I believed her. 18 months after our wedding, I stood in the garden watching Brynn cradle our daughter. We'd named her Isolde after the princess who died peacefully 6 months after her wedding, with Thomas holding her hand. At the funeral, Brynn had wept, but she'd also smiled, remembering Isolde's last words, I got to die loved. Thank you for teaching me that was worth fighting for. That one's a rose, I told baby Isolde, who gurgled happily. Like your mother. I'm not a rose, Brynn protested. Through the bond, I felt her amusement. You absolutely are. Beautiful, strong, and you have thorns when you need them. She laughed, and the sound filled my chest with warmth. That evening, after the baby was asleep, Brynn drew a bath. I found her there, lounging in the water, smiling up at me. This seems familiar, I said. Through the bond, I felt her desire, her love, her absolute certainty in us. You should get in, she said. Is that an order, Your Majesty? It's an invitation. I stripped and joined her, pulling her against me. I've been thinking, she said. Dangerous pastime. Through the bond, I felt her contentment deepen. About that first night, when I wandered into the wrong room. Best mistake of my life, I murmured. Mine too. She turned to face me. But it wasn't really a mistake, was it? The bond would have found us eventually. Perhaps, but I'm glad it found us when it did. I kissed her softly. I wouldn't change a single moment. Not even the part where I broke your heart. Through the bond, I showed her the truth. Not even that. It brought you back to me, showed me what you were willing to fight for. That's worth any pain. She settled against my chest. Through the bond, I felt her peace, her joy, her absolute certainty that this us was exactly where she belonged. And I knew with the same certainty the bond had given me that first night that I would spend the rest of my life making sure she never doubted it. My mate, my queen, my Brynn. Finally, after 30 years of loneliness, I was home. 12 days after I rejected the mate bond, I heard the screaming. I was in the kitchens mechanically chopping vegetables I had no intention of eating when the sound echoed through the corridors. Not human. Something rolled and hurt and wrong. The cooks ran, the servants fled. Everyone knew that sound, a feral alpha. Through the void in my chest, the empty space where the bond used to pulse warm and constant, I felt something flicker. Faint, desperate, Caspian. "Lock the doors," someone shouted. "Get everyone inside." My hands stilled on the knife. Through the chaos, I caught fragments of conversation. King Caspian lost control. His wolf. 3 guards dead already. The knife clattered from my hands. I was running before I decided to move. Through corridors, past panicked servants, following that faint flicker in my chest like a dying star. I found Captain Torvin in the hallway outside Caspian's chambers. His face was grim, his armor splattered with blood. "Where is he?" I demanded. "Who, Brynn?" Torvin's eyes widened. "You shouldn't be here." "Where is he?" "Gone into the Thornwood. His wolf took over completely. He's not himself anymore." The flicker in my chest guttered, almost going out entirely. "How long?" I asked. 12 days, since the ball, since—" He stopped, looked at me with sudden, terrible understanding. "Since you rejected the bond." "I need to find him." "Absolutely not. He's feral, Brynn. He'll kill you. He doesn't recognize anyone anymore. He nearly killed his own men." "No, he won't." "Brynn, he's my mate." The words came out fierce and certain. "I rejected the bond, but it didn't break. Not completely. I can still feel him." I pressed my hand to my chest to that faint, dying flicker. "I can find him." "And then what? You think you can bring him back?" "I have to try." I met Torvin's eyes. "I did this to him. I have to fix it." Torvin studied me for a long moment. Then slowly he stepped aside. "The Thornwood is 3 miles north." He was heading toward the deep forest. "Brynn," his voice stopped me. "If you don't come back, I'm telling everyone the truth. About who you really are. About what Princess Isolde made you do. About how much you loved him." I nodded once. Then I ran. The Thornwood earned its name honestly. I ran through trees that seemed to reach for me with twisted branches. Thorns caught at my dress, my hair, my skin. I didn't slow down. Couldn't. That faint flicker in my chest pulled me forward like a fishhook lodged in my heart. 3 miles, Torvin had said, but distance meant nothing here. The trees grew so thick that daylight became suggestion. The path disappeared within minutes. I followed the bond instead. It was so weak, so faint, I had to stop every few hundred yards to feel for it, pressing my hand to my chest and praying I hadn't lost it entirely. There, northeast. I ran, my lungs burned, my legs shook. I'd grabbed no supplies, no weapon, nothing but the desperate need to find him. The forest grew darker, older. The trees here were massive, their trunks wider than houses. Roots erupted from the ground like frozen serpents. The air smelled of earth and rot and something wild. I'd been running for over an hour when I heard it. Howling, not the clean sound of a wolf calling to its pack. This was broken, raw. The sound of something in agony that had forgotten it was ever anything else. The flicker in my chest flared bright for just a moment. Caspian. I ran faster, ignoring the branches that slashed my face, the roots that tried to trip me. The howling grew louder, closer, until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then it stopped. The silence was worse. I slowed my heart, hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the shadows between the trees. Nothing moved. "Caspian," I called softly. The growl that answered came from behind me. I turned slowly and my breath stopped. The wolf was massive, bigger than a horse with fur so dark it seemed to absorb light. Its eyes glowed faintly amber, and they were fixed on me with an intensity that made every instinct scream run. But I'd come too far to run now. "It's me," I said, taking a small step forward. The wolf's lips pulled back, revealing teeth like daggers. The growl deepened, became a promise of violence. I could smell the wildness on him, could see it in the way he held himself, all coiled muscle and predatory focus. This wasn't Caspian the king, careful and controlled. This was his wolf, unleashed and unbound and utterly feral. This was what I'd done to him. "I know you're angry," I continued, my voice steady despite the terror coursing through my veins. "I know I hurt you. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." The wolf prowled closer. I could see the madness in those glowing eyes. could sense through the fragile thread of the bond the chaos in his mind. Pain and rage and grief all tangled together until there was nothing left but instinct. And his instinct said I was a threat. "Please," I whispered. "I need you to hear me. I need you to know the truth." The wolf lunged. I hit the ground hard, the impact driving the air from my lungs. Massive paws pinned my shoulders. The wolf's face was inches from mine, teeth bared a continuous growl vibrating through his chest and into my bones. I'm going to die. The thought came with strange clarity. This was how it ended, torn apart by the man I loved because I'd been too afraid to fight for him when it mattered. No, the word rose up from somewhere deep inside me. Somewhere that had been silent for 12 days but now burned with sudden, fierce certainty. No, I hadn't survived 22 years of saying yes to everyone else just to die saying no to myself. I'd come to bring him home. And I would, even if it killed me. Especially if it killed me, because at least then I'd die having tried. So instead of struggling, instead of fighting, I did the one thing every instinct screamed against. I tilted my head back, exposing my throat. Submission. Trust. A gesture as old as wolves themselves. I am yours. I am not a threat. I surrender. The growling changed, became questioning, confused. The massive head lowered. I felt hot breath against my neck. Felt teeth sharp and deadly press against my pulse point. One bite. That's all it would take. I love you, I whispered. My name is Brynn. I'm not a princess. I'm just a kitchen maid who got drunk and stumbled into the wrong room and fell in love with a king. And I'm sorry I lied. I'm sorry I hurt you. But I love you. I've loved you since the moment you found me in your bath. And I'm not leaving you alone ever again. The teeth pressed harder. Then impossibly they gentled. The wolf's tongue, rough and warm, dragged across my neck. Once. Twice. Scenting me. Recognizing me. The pressure on my shoulders eased. The growling stopped. I opened my eyes and found amber wolf eyes staring down at me, still wild, still feral. But something else now, too, something that looked almost like confusion. That's right, I breathed. It's me, your mate. I'm here. I came back for you. The wolf made a sound almost like a whine. His massive head lowered, pressed against my chest, right over my heart, right where the bond lived. And the bond, that fragile thread that had barely survived the rejection, suddenly blazed to life. It hit me like lightning. 12 days of his pain, his grief, his rage, all flooding through at once. I gasped, my back arching, overwhelmed by the sheer intensity of it. But underneath all that darkness, I felt something else. Recognition. Relief. Hope. Mate. Mine. Found you. He knew me. The wolf's form began to shimmer. I watched transfixed as fur receded and bones reshaped. The transformation was beautiful and terrible, and when it finished, it wasn't a wolf pinning me to the forest floor. It was Caspian. He was naked, covered in dirt and scratches. His hair wild, his eyes still more amber than brown. He looked at me like he wasn't entirely sure I was real. Brynn, his voice was rough from disused questioning. Tears streamed down my face. Yes, I'm Brynn. Not Isolde. No, I'm not the princess. I'm nobody. I'm just a kitchen maid who got drunk and stumbled into the wrong room and fell in love with a king. He stared at me. I waited for anger, for betrayal, for the hate I deserved. Instead, his hand came up, cupped my face with a gentleness that broke my heart all over again. Why, he asked. Isolde asked me to, begged me to. She needed you to end the engagement, and my voice cracked. I was so stupid. I thought I was protecting you. I thought I wasn't good enough. I thought, stop, he said softly. I'm sorry, I sobbed. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I love you. I love you so much, and I know you probably hate me now, but I had to find you. I had to tell you the truth. I couldn't leave you out here alone. Brynn, he said my name like a prayer. Look at me. I met his eyes. They were clearer now, more human, though the amber still flickered at the edges. I don't hate you, he said. You should. I know. The corner of his mouth lifted in something that wasn't quite a smile. But I don't. I couldn't if I tried. The bond isn't why I love you. He shifted, took some of his weight off me, but didn't move away. The bond made me notice you, made me want you. But I fell in love with you, with whoever you are, because of who you are. The way you laugh, the way you see the best in people, the way you tried so hard to push me away even though it was killing you. He stroked my cheek with his thumb. I felt it, through the bond. Every moment you were lying to me. Every time you forced yourself to be cruel when all you wanted was to be kind. It was agony for you. You knew. Not the details, not why. But I knew you were suffering. His other hand found mine, laced our fingers together. And I loved you anyway. Every version of you. The princess, the kitchen maid, the woman who can't play piano to save her life. Despite everything, I laughed. It came out watery and broken, but it was a laugh. I can't read properly, I confessed. I don't know the first thing about being the queen. I'll embarrass you at every state function. I don't care. Your council will hate me. Let them. He leaned down, pressed his forehead to mine. Claim me. I blinked. What? You rejected the bond. I accepted. But it didn't break. Couldn't break because we're too tangled up in each other. His voice dropped lower, rougher. So claim me back. Make me yours again. Please, Uayo. I don't know how, I whispered. Yes, you do. He tilted his head, exposing his throat. The same gesture I'd made. Submission. Trust. Bite me. My heart stuttered. Caspian. I need it, he said simply. I need to be yours, completely. No doubts, no rejections, just us. I looked at his throat, at the vulnerable column of it, the pulse beating steady beneath the skin, at the offering he was making. I leaned up and pressed my lips to his neck, felt him shudder, felt the bond between us pulse bright with anticipation. I claim you, I whispered against his skin. I choose you, now and always. I Brynn claim you Caspian as my mate. Then I bit down, not hard enough to really hurt, just enough to mark, to seal the bond between us. The world exploded into light. I felt everything. His relief so profound it was almost painful. His love vast and unconditional. His wolf settling back into place, content now that it had found its mate. And underneath it all, the bone-deep certainty that we belonged together. The bond snapped into place stronger than before, unbreakable now. When I pulled back, there was a perfect impression of my teeth on his neck. He was smiling and his eyes were fully human again. Mine, he said. Yours, I agreed. He kissed me then, and it tasted like coming home. We stayed in the forest for 3 days. Caspian couldn't travel yet. The feral state had taken too much out of him. He was weak, shaky, his control over the wolf tenuous at best. So we stayed. I found a stream, managed to catch fish with my bare hands, which made Caspian laugh so hard he nearly fell over. At night, we held each other and talked, really talked for the first time since this whole mess began. I told him everything, about being an orphan found on the palace steps as a baby, about learning to say yes because no felt like abandonment, about Isolde's illness, the deal, the blackmail that wasn't really blackmail because I'd agreed out of pity more than fear. He told me about the loneliness of being king at 22, about his father's fear of his own son's power, about the desperate hope he'd felt when he thought he'd found his mate. I was going to court you so carefully, he said on the second night, his fingers tracing patterns on my arm. Take it slow, let you set the pace, and then you rejected me, and He didn't finish, didn't need to. I'd felt his grief through the wind. I won't ever leave you again, I promised. You'd better not. He pulled me closer. I don't think I'd survive it a second time. On the morning of the 4th day, we heard horses. Captain Torvin appeared through the trees, followed by 6 of his best men. He took one look at us, Caspian wrapped in my torn cloak, me in a dress that was more holes than fabric, and smiled. Your Majesty, we've come to escort you home. How did you find us? Caspian asked. Torvin's gaze slid to me. She said she could feel the bond, that it would guide her. I took a chance and followed the same direction she ran. Caspian's hand found mine. Good instinct. Yes, well, Torvin cleared his throat. There's something you should know before we return. Princess Isolde announced her illness publicly 2 days ago. Told the entire court about her terminal diagnosis. About the deal she made with Brynn. My heart stopped. She what? She took full responsibility. Said she'd asked you to help her, that you agreed out of compassion. That the mate bond forming was fate's intervention, not deception. Where is she now? I asked. With her father. They've been talking. A lot. We rode back in silence. I sat in front of Caspian on his horse, his arms steady around me. The bond hummed between us, peaceful now. But my mind raced. Isolde had confessed, had taken the blame, had sacrificed everything to protect me. Why the palace was in chaos when we arrived. Servants rushed to meet us. Physicians descended on Caspian, demanding to examine him. Someone tried to pull me away, hustle me toward the servants' quarters. Absolutely not. Caspian said, his voice carrying unmistakable command. She stays with me. Your Majesty, she's a servant. She's my maid. He looked at me and his expression softened. And my future queen if she'll have me. My mouth fell open. We'll discuss this after you've rested, Your Majesty, Madame Voss said tightly. There's nothing to discuss. Caspian held out his hand to me. Coming. I took his hand without hesitation. We made it to his chambers before the real confrontation began. King Edmund was waiting in Caspian's receiving room with a contingent of advisors. His face was thunderous. King Caspian, he said, his voice cold, we need to discuss this situation. I agree, Caspian said calmly, but first I need to see Princess Isolde. That won't be possible. It wasn't a request. The two kings stared at each other. Through the bond, I felt Caspian's absolute certainty, his refusal to back down. Edmund broke first, gesturing sharply to a guard. Isolde arrived 10 minutes later, flanked by attendants. She looked thinner than I remembered, paler, but her eyes were clear and calm. When she saw me, something flickered across her face. Relief, maybe, or gratitude. Your Majesty, she said, curtsying to Caspian. Princess, he studied her. I hear you've been making announcements on my behalf. I announced the truth, that I'm dying, that I asked Brynn to help me escape a marriage I knew I couldn't fulfill. Her gaze slid to me, and that she deserves better than prison for showing compassion. She impersonated a royal, Edmund snapped. That's treason. It's not treason when the royal in question gave permission, Isolde shot back. You had no right. I had every right, her voice cracked. You wouldn't listen when I tried to tell you about the illness. You just kept pushing, kept insisting on this marriage. I had to do something. Edmund's face crumpled. You should have told me. Would it have changed anything? Tears streamed down Isolde's face. Would you have let me choose how to spend my last months? Silence fell. Through the bond, I felt Caspian's compassion, his understanding. He cleared his throat. Your Majesty, the engagement between myself and Princess Isolde is ended by mutual agreement. The alliance between our kingdoms, however, doesn't need to be dependent on a marriage neither of us wants. But the treaties can be renegotiated. Trade agreements, border protections, military alliances. I'm willing to work with you on all of it. Edmund looked between us, clearly struggling. As for Brynn, Caspian continued, and his hand found mine. I intend to marry her, not because of the mate bond, though that's certainly a factor, but because I love her, because she ran into a forest full of danger to save me, because she's brave and kind and exactly who I want standing beside me. She's a servant, one of the advisors protested. Through the bond, I felt Caspian's anger spike. She's my mate, he said flatly. That makes her my equal. Ancient law is clear on this. Ancient law also says, a door opened. A young man in scholar's robes hurried in carrying a massive book. He set it down with a heavy thud. Forgive the interruption, he said, bowing, but I believe I can clarify the legal standing. Thomas, Isolde breathed. The scholar Thomas opened his book to a marked page. The law is clear, he said. When a mate bond is recognized between an alpha and their chosen, that bond takes precedence over all other considerations. Title, birth, wealth, none of it matters. The mate is to be accepted as the alpha's equal in all things. He looked up, met Isolde's eyes. I've been researching this for years, because I hoped it might apply to those of us who found love outside our prescribed stations. Thomas, Edmund said slowly. Are you saying, I love your daughter, Thomas said quietly. I know I'm nobody, just a palace scholar. But I couldn't let her die thinking I never fought for her. My throat tightened. Through the bond, I felt Caspian's satisfaction. We weren't alone in this. Your Majesty, Caspian said to Edmund, the world is changing. Your daughter is dying. Are you really going to spend her last months fighting about who she's allowed to love? Edmund sat down heavily. He looked old suddenly, tired. Is there anything else I don't know? He asked. I stepped forward before I could stop myself. The food shortage in the northern province can be solved by rerouting 2 of the trade convoys, I said quietly. Everyone turned to stare at me. I felt my face heat, but continued. I used to work in the kitchens. I know how food distribution works. If you redirect the southern convoys north, you'd have enough grain to last through winter. The south can supplement from their own stores. Silence. Then one of the advisors leaned forward. That might actually work. Through the bond, I felt Caspian's pride in me. Edmund looked at his daughter, at Thomas, at Caspian and me. Very well, he said finally. The engagement is dissolved. King Caspian, you may marry your mate, but she undergoes training first. I won't have people say we're entirely without standards. Agreed, Caspian said. Edmund turned to Isolde. And you, if you want to spend your time with this scholar, do it properly. Marry him, with full honors. Isolde's hands flew to her mouth. Father, I won't have my daughter die unwed, Edmund said gruffly. Through the bond, I felt Caspian's joy mirror my own. He pulled me close and whispered, "See, I told you we'd fight for our future." I looked up at him, tears streaming down my face. I love you. I know, he said, and kissed me while the court watched. The double wedding took place 3 weeks later. Isolde and Thomas married first in a small ceremony in the palace chapel. Isolde looked beautiful in cream silk, though I could see how the illness was taking its toll. Thomas looked at her like she was made of stars. Caspian and I married that evening as the sun set. I wore a dress Isolde had commissioned, pale gold that caught the light. Around my neck, the pendant Caspian had given me. A wolf and a rose intertwined. I walked down the aisle alone. No father to give me away. No family to smile from the seats. But Wren and Hollis were there crying happy tears. Captain Torvin stood as witness. And at the end of the aisle, Caspian waited with a smile that made my heart forget to beat. You came, he said when I reached him. Through the bond, I felt his love, his certainty, his joy. Always, I promised. The ceremony was brief, the vows simple. When we kissed, the bond between us sang so brightly that several people swore they saw light. At the reception, Isolde pulled me aside. Thank you, she said. For what? For being brave enough to save him. For showing me that fighting for love is always worth it. She glanced at Thomas. I have maybe 2 months left, but I'll have them with him, because of you. I hugged her carefully. I'm sorry. Don't be. She pulled back, smiling through tears. I'm not anymore. 18 months after our wedding, I stood in the council room and listened to Lord Brynn drone on about tariff disputes. I'd learned so much. How to read complex documents, how to navigate court politics, how to hold my own in debates about trade and taxation and military strategy. But more importantly, I'd learned to trust myself. The solution is obvious, I said, interrupting Brennan mid-sentence. He sputtered. Your Majesty, I hardly think. Reduce the tariff on grain from the western provinces by half. Increase it on luxury goods from the east by a third. Use the difference to fund better roads. Better roads mean faster transport. Faster transport means fresher food at lower cost. I looked around the table. Everyone wins except people importing silk. I think we'll survive. Silence. Then several advisors started nodding. Through the bond, I felt Caspian's amusement, his pride, his love. After the meeting, he pulled me into a private corridor. You're magnificent, he said, backing me against the wall. Is that a complaint? It's worship. He kissed me thoroughly. Have I mentioned today that I love you? Not in the last hour. Through the bond, I felt his devotion, his certainty that I was exactly where I belonged. I love you, he said. You're brilliant and fierce, and you make me absurdly happy. I smiled against his lips. I have news. Good news or bad news? That depends on how you feel about sleepless nights and dirty nappies. Through the bond, I felt his emotions spike. Joy, wonder, awe. You're pregnant. Yes. I smiled. Surprise. He picked me up and spun me around laughing. When he set me down, his eyes were bright with tears. We're having a baby, he said. Through the pond, our joy, tangled together, magnified, became something bigger than either of us alone. We are, I said. He cupped my face. Thank you for stumbling into my bath drunk, for being terrible at piano, for loving me enough to find me when I was lost. Always, I whispered. 1 year later, 2.5 years after our wedding, I stood in the garden cradling our daughter while Caspian pointed out flowers. That one's a rose, he said to the baby who gurgled happily, like your mother. I'm not a rose, I protested. Through the bond, I felt his amusement, his absolute certainty. You absolutely are. Beautiful, strong, and you have thorns when you need them. We'd named her Isolde. The princess had died peacefully 6 months after her wedding with Thomas holding her hand. At the funeral, I'd wept, but I'd also smiled remembering her last words to me. I got to die loved. Not everyone gets that. Thank you for teaching me it was worth fighting for. Now, holding her namesake, I felt the weight of that gift. She would have loved her, I said quietly. Through the bond, Caspian sent me comfort, certainty. She did, he said, in whatever way she could. That evening after the baby was asleep and I found myself drawn to the bathing chamber where this all began. Caspian found me there lounging in the water, smiling up at him. This seems familiar, he said. Through the bond, I felt his desire, his love, the memories of that first night. Does it? I patted the water beside me. You should get in. Is that an order, Your Majesty? It's an invitation. He stripped and joined me, pulling me against him. I've been thinking, I said. Dangerous pastime. I elbowed him gently. About that night, the first night, when I wandered into the wrong room. Through the bond, I felt his contentment deepen. Best mistake of my life, he murmured. Mine too. I turned to face him. But it wasn't really a mistake, was it? The bond would have found us, eventually. Perhaps, but I'm glad it found us when it did. I wouldn't change a single moment. Not even the part where I broke your heart. Through the bond, he showed me the truth. Every moment of pain had led to this, to us, to our daughter sleeping peacefully in the next room, to a future neither of us had dared imagine. Not even that, he said. It brought you back to me, showed me what you were willing to fight for. That's worth any pain. I settled against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Through the bond, I felt his peace, his joy, his absolute certainty that this us was exactly where we both belonged. Tell our daughter this story someday, I said, when she's old enough. Tell her that her mother was nobody special, just a girl who couldn't say no. Until she said yes to the only thing that mattered, Caspian finished. Exactly. We stayed in the bath until the water grew cold, until stars appeared in the darkening sky outside, until the bond between us settled into that perfect contentment that comes from being exactly where you belong. I'd spent my whole life saying yes to everyone else, but I'd finally learned to say yes to myself, and that made all the difference. The crown I'd never wanted had become the life I couldn't imagine living without, and the servant girl who'd stumbled drunk into a king's chambers had found her way home, not to a throne, but to herself, and to the man who'd loved every version of me along the way.